Hey everybody, it's Doug Green and I'm the publisher of Technology Reseller News, and I'm very pleased to have with me Keith Buell of Numeracle. Keith, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Doug.
So we're going to be talking about a blog that Numeracle recently posted, Logos Don't Stop Scams, the fight for caller integrity. We're going to get into that and much more. But Keith, what does Numeracle do?
Numeracle was founded 7 years ago when the founder, Rebecca Johnson, realized that legitimate callers were being tripped up by the blocking and labeling that the industry had put in place to stop the bad calls that nobody wants to get. And calls from doctors and banks and pharmacies were being labeled as spam. And Numeracle's core mission is to make sure that lawful communications can get through to the recipients. But more generally, we believe in identity, that the parties on both sides of a communication, whether email, voice, messaging, should know with certainty who's on the other end of that communication, because that identity builds trust.
What is the SIP Forum Branded Calling Summit?
So the SIP Forum is a group that's been around. I think we just had our 25th anniversary, that originated as kind of a technical standard to replace the old SS7 TDM networks with more modern IP-based networks. The Branded Calling Summit was a virtual conference a couple weeks ago that had a variety of presenters over 3 days talking about the developments and technologies behind branded calling.
And what's your role in that organization?
I'm on the board of directors. It's a board of about 12 people or so that from across the ecosystem of carriers and the companies that do spam labeling and blocking for those carriers and other interested parties, like Numeracle, that have a vested interest in preserving the integrity of communications.
So I understand you were sponsoring the event, and also there was Numeracle speaking at the event as well.
Yeah, we were a sponsor, and we had the good fortune to be the first presenter on the first day of the event, and talked about a lot of the topics that we're about to go into right now.
So yeah, let's talk about that. You were apparently the first presenter at the event.
Yeah, I don't know if we sponsored, paid more, or just luck of the draw, but it's always good to go first, I think. So we got our voice out there and got heard. The rest of the presentations were fantastic as well, of other companies and interested parties talking about the future of branded calling, or what I prefer to call it, identity presentation.
And let's get into that. So what's that all about?
So branded calling is a modern replacement for CNAM, or caller name, which has been around for several decades now. And it allows not only the phone number to come up on your incoming call display, but also the caller's name to come up on the incoming display screen. And the caller name has not been as prevalent on the wireless side as it was on the wireline side for various economic and technical reasons. But what branded calling is doing is trying to update and replace the legacy CNAM systems with something better, more accurate, and more secure, because CNAM is easily spoofable and often out of date.
Now, why is it difficult to achieve trust with branded calling?
So branded calling, there's a variety of technologies behind it that have different levels of security and trust, and it's somewhat opaque to the end user who receives the call. If the name pops up and it says Chase Bank, they don't know whether that's an old CNAM system, whether it's an insecure version of branded calling, or whether it's a more secure version like the BCID ecosystem that Numeracle is participating in. So one thing that we are trying to do is differentiate the different types of branded calling so consumers can know when to trust a call and when not to trust a call.
Now, help me understand this. I sort of was very excited when I first heard the idea of, oh, wow, we're going to see a logo. Well, that's something I can trust. But apparently even that doesn't fully get you there.
So logos have been kind of the holy grail of branded calling for the last 5 years. Typically, branded calling originated with just name and no other indicators, no trust indicator like a green check mark, no call reason. It was just the name of the company, which to the recipient looked the same kind of as it always had been. And what we want to avoid is a situation where consumers don't understand the difference between an insecure version of branded calling that anybody can spoof, or the secure version that we're working with in BCID that has a very detailed and rigorous know your customer vetting process and secure transmission, so that when that call rings and displays the caller's name and logo at the end, that can be trusted. So going back to the logo that you questioned, there's been a lot that's wrong about logos and branded calling over the years. A lot of the marketing materials have shown logos in trying to entice companies to sign up for branded calling. But until very recently, logos existed only on certain Android devices, on certain carriers, often with pre-installed app downloads to enable that logo display. They were not out there for iPhones. They were not out there for all carriers. So callers got kind of excited and misled by the availability of logos, because that is what everybody wants to see, is that their company logo show up on the incoming call screen when you call a customer or a potential customer. And Apple and the Android manufacturers like Samsung and Motorola have recently upgraded to allow logo display in a better way. But the crux of the matter that we're trying to work on is to make sure that those logos only display when it's a secure pathway, because that trust that we've all worked hard, not just Numeracle, but the BCID ecosystem, as well as other companies in the branded calling space, all the efforts we've done will be for naught if that same logo display can be displayed on a bad call or a spoofed call or an illegal scam call.
You know, Keith, it I think leaves a lot of people, I'm one of them, sometimes confused, because there's a lot of people running around talking about branded calling solutions, but it's not apparently the same as branded calling ID. Is that correct?
Yeah, so branded calling is kind of the generic term for any way of getting the caller's name on a call display. It can just be a CNAM update, or it can be a simple technology where the terminating carrier looks in their database of who's bought branded calling. And if a certain phone number comes in, they say, oh, we've got to display this name and potentially this logo. The problem with that is if anyone spoofs that same phone number, they're going to get the exact same call display as the legitimate caller. One example of that is just last week, I got an incoming call that said Chase, and I have accounts with Chase Bank, and I answered more thinking it's a scam than, and I'm a kind of sophisticated call recipient, but I answered that call, and it turns out it was not Chase. It was a scammer who had spoofed a legitimate Chase phone number for a Chase branch, and it came up with the CNAM Chase. And I played along, and I realized quite quickly that it was a scam. And I'm glad it didn't have a Chase logo or a green check mark trying to show reliability. But that does show the vulnerability that, if I'm the head of outbound communications at Chase, it's going to be important to me. Two things. One, I can get my name and my logo out there on my calls. And conversely, nobody else can get their name and my logo on their calls. So we have to solve both sides of that equation. We have to get the presentation for the legitimate callers and make sure that the bad callers cannot get a similar presentation on the call display.
So Keith, let's stick with this situation that you experienced, because it's got so many elements to it. Here you are, a person that's immersed in the whole issue, but it took you a little bit of time, apparently, to figure out, oh, okay, this is not a genuine phone call.
Yeah, I mean, if I Googled the phone number on the spot, and it was a legitimate phone number, it was not some, it was a spoof phone number, but it was, we see different types of spoofing where they, will spoof any random phone number. This was a deliberate attempt to spoof a Chase phone number to get that Chase caller name to display on the recipient's phone, because they were pretending to be Chase, but they weren't.
And this is a great example, because Chase is, basically it's a bank. It does business with everyone, charities, people of every age, people of every income, and so on and so forth, right? So not everyone's going to be alerted or up on the latest on branding and so on. So we're talking about BCID. How does BCID build trust in branding that ultimately the consumers are going to recognize and trust?
So what BCID does is puts a lot of guardrails and requirements on call display. And CTIA is the kind of trust hub for BCID. And CTIA, for those who don't know, is the trade association for the wireless industry. And they have imposed a rigorous set of standards and requirements to basically solve what we call the three pillars of trusted communications. Verifiable trusted identity. Who is actually originating this communication? The second pillar is secure transmission, making sure that that gets from the start of the call to the end of the call. And then trusted presentation, making sure that that information is presented on the device of the call recipient. So what CTIA has done is created these standards and has contracts with different participants in the BCID ecosystem. They are originating service providers, who are the companies that originate calls. They're the terminating service providers. The companies like, T-Mobile has signed up and they're the first terminating service provider, or TSP. There are call onboarders, which is a role that Numeracle plays, and we work with the businesses to get them signed up and into the system. The vetters, which are the ones that verify all that information. There's the call signers who actually put that trusted information into the call signaling path. And then there's a couple of companies that serve as the trust anchor, as well as kind of the hub for billing and data management for the entire ecosystem. So it's a lot of different complicated roles out there, but what makes this good and better than the alternatives is that level of trust and standards that CTIA enforces. If someone breaks the rules, they're out of the ecosystem, and then their calls will not be presented with the same display that shows the level of trust and standards set throughout the entire process.
And Keith, I think you mentioned in passing, and let's go over it too. You guys we've heard about these pillars of trusted communications.
Yeah, so stir shaken is something that the FCC implemented, required about 5 years ago. And I call that the middle third of the call path. It's from the originating service provider to the terminating service provider. And it allows the terminating provider to know who originated the call and what they say about who owns that phone number. But it does not tell you who's calling. And there's no requirement to present what information is sent to the terminating provider to the consumer's display. So I've been saying for several years that stir shaken is the middle third of the complete path. And we see the three pillars as verified identity, verifiable identity, where Numeracle does a deep, rigorous dive using our industry-leading Know Your Customer standards and requirements to find out that this really is Doug Green, this really is Technology Reseller who wants to make this phone call, and not someone pretending to be him. I mean, you're probably not the guy who's most likely to be spoofed. Those most vulnerable are, banks and healthcare and other government agencies. Yeah. So that's the first pillar, is that verifiable trusted identity. And then the second pillar is making sure that that information goes from the originating provider to the terminating provider. Right now, that only works if there is an all IP pathway for that call to go through. And the country is in the process of transitioning from TDM, the old-fashioned call technology, to more modern IP formats, but that is been a slow process. The FCC is still looking into that. And then the third pillar is presenting this information to the customer so that when their phone rings and they see that name, they see that logo, they see that call reason, they see a check mark, they know this really is, to go back to that example, Chase Bank calling and not someone pretending to be Chase Bank. So all three of those have to work in harmony for that process to work. And what we envision is a day that's not quite here yet, but we hope to have it soon in the next few years, where a company like Chase, and I'm not picking on Chase here, just I've been using them because that's the call I got last week, right. But it could be your healthcare company, an insurance provider, the IRS, a government agency, anyone else who needs to make those communications. They can tell their constituents or their customers, a call from us looks like this. If it doesn't look like this, it's right. Probably spoofed. You should not trust it. And if you get a call like that and you have any doubts whatsoever, you should find a legitimate phone number and call us back rather than rely on the incoming call that someone else could have spoofed. So we need to get that trusted presentation. And then, like I said earlier, the flip side is making sure that the bad callers, the scammers, cannot get a similar presentation. Because if they do, and the different types and levels of security are not differentiated, sorry about my little cough, then all this is for naught, because those customers they might receive a call that says Chase or that receives a call from their hospital system, but they won't know whether it's legit or not. And we're back where we started.
Well, Keith, in a way, I'm very happy that you sort of picked on poor Chase. There's a Fortune 500 company, wealthy, sophisticated, but it's a good example of how, other consumers, for example, might not make the fine difference that you're making. In other words, at some point, companies that ignore what's going on could see an erosion of their reputation and could see an erosion of their ability to communicate with their own customers.
Absolutely. And I strongly believe in the public switch telephone network and voice communications.
Right.
But a lot of companies are abandoning that due to lack of trust, that they might contact you through an app, or they might try to use messaging, which has its own plethora of problems that I won't get into today. That's an entirely separate conversation. But Numeracle would like to restore voice communications to a place where we know who's at the other end of the line, and it's a secure and reliable pathway for businesses and governments to communicate with individuals and vice versa. If we lose that, we're going back 100 years to this time when different systems didn't talk to each other. And we're already starting to see that fragmentation now where, I use Zoom, you use Teams, they use WhatsApp, someone else is on FaceTime. And we've got all these separate little walled gardens that don't communicate with each other. And that fragmentation, is going to lead to an inability of people to communicate with others that they need to reach out to.
If you're an enterprise or if you're a service provider, and so many of our readers and watchers are, is there something that they can do right now to accelerate this process?
So we're encouraging both enterprises and service providers to reach out to us. Service providers, we know the BCID technical requirements inside and out. And for those originating service providers who want to participate, we can hold their hand through the process, help them get set up, help them deal with all the complexities of it. It's not the hardest thing in the world, but it's not so simple and straightforward that it's plug and play yet either. But Numeracle's experience in developing and implementing this lets us work with originating service providers to get them on board. And right now we welcome enterprises to reach out to us as well. Ultimately, an enterprise has to be working with an originating service provider who's part of the BCID ecosystem. So that's something that's still in development. As we get more and more originating service providers signed up, it's easier and easier for enterprises to find somebody, or preferably their existing provider is already set up to be working and ready to send calls.
Keith, I really want to thank you for joining me today. This, as always, very interesting. It's a work in progress. I want everybody to, pay close attention to this. This is really interesting. Where can we learn more about Numeracle and also this topic?
So our website is www.numeracle.com. And I guess I said the www. Does anyone say that anymore? I guess I just did. But numeracle.com, where you can learn about our service offerings and about BCID and how we can help you join the CTIA ecosystem. And, if you're a terminating service provider, it's a way to get paid for your calls that you receive. And if you're an originating service provider, it's a way for you to recruit customers who want to get that verified identity passed down to the call recipient. So we're here and ready to help.
And let me echo what Keith just said to all of our service provider watchers and listeners. If you're a service provider and you'd like to partner with Numeracle and get started with BCID, reach out to Numeracle, numeracle.com. There's a lot of great resources there. Keith, always interesting. I'm looking forward to the next one. But for now, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks, Doug. Always happy to talk.